Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting on Teams of the Customer Services and Operational Performance Panel meeting. I'd like to welcome everybody, and we can start the meeting by taking apologies. Howard or Jamie?
Chair, I have no apologies for absence from members. I think all members are in attendance, and there are a number of staff on the call to deal with the various areas of the business.
Thank you. And as always, we know that safety is paramount to TfL, and so I would encourage members to raise any safety issues, no matter how big or small, that's related to items of the agenda or within the remit of this panel. So, please take that on board. Let's move on to item number 2, declaration of interest. Are there any to update us on?
Chair, all the interest for members are up to date on the website, and I'm not aware of there being anything specific that relates to any item on this agenda, but obviously members are free to declare anything if they're aware of any issue.
Thank you, Howard. The next item is minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of September. First of all, are there any issues with accuracy? And if not, can I ask for approval of those minutes, please?
Yeah,
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Those minutes are approved. Item 4, matters arising from the last meeting and some of the ongoing items.
Yes, Chair. So as usual, we provided you with an update of where we are with the outstanding actions. There was nothing I particularly wanted to draw your attention to, but if there's anything anybody would like to ask a question about, then please just let me know.
Thank you. And before I start with a substantive item, just like to remind members, there is a part 2 where we consider in depth the enterprise risk. It's a new risk that's allocated to this panel. And then there will be an informal briefing from members of the Disability Advisory Group. So if members can stay on after part 1, that would be much appreciated.
Chair, I'm not sure whether Lynn Sloman wanted to come in with a question on the action.
All right, okay. Sorry, Lynn.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Howard. Just to say that one of the actions is about key performance indicators in relation to taxi and private hire, and we've received a briefing note on that, haven't we, from officers. And I know that I noted that suggested that there might be some key performance indicators that we might want to add to our quarterly report. I actually didn't have a particular view about whether the suggestions were likely to be useful or not, but I wanted to check about whether we're going to give some sort of indication to officers at some point about whether those would be useful, or whether that's something we come back to by email.
Yes, well, obviously we'd be welcome to do that now, or to drop us an email afterwards. I don't know if everybody's had a chance to read that note.
Maybe it's simply something for us to deal with by email, unless others have strong views. I don't think it was me who raised the query. It was quite a long time ago that we asked about this. So I think we may have forgotten what it was we were asking about a year ago.
I think the update email we received recently, I think that was only about a few days ago, was that it's a work in progress. But it is important that we review those KPIs to do with this issue from a customer perspective. The KPIs need to be relevant to customers. So I think, a future email briefing, would be helpful to allow members to have an input to see whether those are the right KPIs from a customer's perspective before we actually sign them off formally, through this panel. Okay, thank you, Lynn. So can I invite Mark Evers to take us through item 5?
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for an opportunity to provide you with an update on TfL's communication and stakeholder engagement during the period between the end of August and the 26th of October. I know that people will have read through the presentation. However, it might just be worthwhile sort of stepping through and just picking out a few key points from each of the slides, if that's okay. Starting with page 18 of the pack and the context area. I think just worthwhile noting that obviously we had the start of the second national lockdown on the 5th of November, and sort of since then we've continued to maintain our services at normal levels, and there haven't been sort of very significant changes to the travel advice that we're sort of providing. We'll go into a little bit later on as to exactly where the emphasis has been over the period covered by this paper. It is worth noting that on the first day after the institution of the national lockdown, we saw quite significant drops in tube ridership and in bus ridership. The tube was down about 46% and buses down 27%. What we're seeing now is sort of quite a stable pattern. On yesterday, so the 17th of November, tube journeys were around about 24% of normal demand, and the bus journeys were around about 49% of normal demand. And that's been a pretty constant picture over the last couple of weeks. Moving on to page 19 or slide 3 of the presentation, we continue to use all available communication channels to talk to our customers. This includes radio, adverts, posters, PA announcements within stations, social media posts, and a lot more to ensure that Londoners continue to comply with the requirement to wear face coverings, to continue to social distance, and just sort of our efforts to keep on providing that core customer information to people. We are providing real-time information detailing the busier periods and sort of where people can potentially sort of travel at times to avoid those. On slide 4 or page 20, we talk a little bit about some of the improvements that we've been making to Journey Planner and our real-time information. We update the Journey Planner datasets on a daily basis, and we also make those available as open data to third parties, as you'll recall. Very sort of pleasingly, we have seen over 55,000 downloads so far of the TfL Go app, and it is being rated very strongly in the Apple Store at the moment. We continue to make improvements to that app over time. Most recently, customers can now see nearby buses, and that information shows the live arrival times and the location of bus stops that are nearby to them, so that they can have a sort of a more complete and comprehensive view of public transport options available to them. On page 21 or slide 5, detail some of the work that our press office has been doing to deliver our key messages, issuing heaps of press releases on our key milestones, activities, sort of keeping dialogue open with more than 1,400 journalists. Focus of that activity has been our enhanced cleaning regime, face covering compliance, and the promotion of active travel. We're also doing a lot to use social media channels as well, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. On page 22, we cover off some of the work that we're doing sort of from an advertising sort of campaign perspective. Again, this is emphasising work around our cleaning, promotion of face coverings, and sort of encouraging Londoners to walk short trips. We've had feedback from our enforcement teams suggesting that sort of a key group of people to try to encourage to wear face coverings are young male Londoners, and so we have some bespoke advertising campaigns seeking to reach out to to that group in order to encourage compliance, in particular sort of some bespoke radio advertising, which is featured on London radio stations that have a younger listening demographic, but also using digital radio channels like Spotify in order to target younger Londoners who perhaps aren't wearing face coverings as much as we would like. Obviously, it isn't just a problem with younger Londoners. It is sort of something which we see across the board. However, overall, face covering compliance remains quite strong and is something which we've seen, if anything, improve over recent weeks. On page 23 or slide 7, we talk about that face covering compliance a little bit more. I think the key thing to emphasise on this slide is I guess the work that we've been doing to make it clear that we do understand that not everyone is able to wear a face covering. There are some people for whom there is a legitimate exemption. Since the 20th of June, we've had in place an exemption card to support customers who aren't able to wear face coverings for a number of reasons. And more recently, we have produced a badge similar to the Please Offer Me a Seat badge that shows that the wearer is exempt. And so far, we've seen almost 20,000 badges being distributed. As I mentioned, face covering compliance remains sort of between 90 and 95%, and we continue to work really closely with the British Transport Police, Met Police, and our own enforcement officers to enforce in those circumstances where a limited number of people still aren't complying with the requirement to wear face coverings. On 24, we talk about sort of the work that we're doing to demonstrate the efforts that we're going to maintain a clean network. And I guess sort of something to pull out here would be the installation of some UV light sanitizing devices that have been installed on our escalators or on some of our escalators in order to improve the sanitization levels on the handrails. They're proving to be very effective, and we'll sort of continue to roll those out across the network. We have also agreed an extension to our partnership with Dettol, which provides free hand sanitizer to us, but then also for us to pass on to our customers alongside a commercial agreement with them. And pleased to say that deal has been extended to cover all of the public transport network from December through until January 2022. We're also doing a lot of work with a variety of academic institutions, both Imperial College London and University College London, ensuring that we're doing testing to see what the prevalence of coronavirus is like on our network. I'm pleased to say that the work done by Imperial College in October revealed that none of the samples that they took had presence of coronavirus there. And then we're doing this academic study with University College London, looking into I guess how we can better understand and then mitigate the transmission of coronavirus on sort of transport systems. So obviously we will update the panel with information as that becomes available. On page 25, some indication here of some of the work that we're doing to promote quieter times on the network. We've added new information to our website to help customers to understand how the network's changed since the start of the pandemic. We're conscious of the fact that we're always getting new people coming back to the network, and it's important they understand what things are like now. So there's some information there that shows the overall travel volume on the network, but also some specific information around individual stations so that people can plan their journeys to take advantage of quieter times on the network. On slide 10 or page 26 covers off stakeholder engagement. A lot of work over this period with the Department for Education, boroughs and the Department for Transport to ensure that we continue to get school children back to their schools. I think overall that has gone very well, but obviously an area that we continue to collaborate with those stakeholders on. We have also been doing a lot of work to ensure that work on street space across London is being coordinated effectively, and that we're providing providing opportunities for stakeholders to make their views known. On the 20th of November, we hosted the first London Street Space Advisory Group meeting, which was successful, and also worthwhile noting that the Commissioner and Will Norman attended London First Infrastructure Summit to discuss the future of transport in London and active travel, both during the pandemic and beyond as well. On page 27, talks a little bit about the work that we've done to mark Car Free Day, obviously a little bit different this year, but there was a 2-week online campaign encouraging Londoners to show their support by exploring the city on foot or by bicycle. We worked very closely with some partners on this as well, including Open House, to just sort of, again, demonstrate the parts of London that can be accessed by walking routes or by guided cycling trails. On page 27, on page 28 rather, we cover off some bits on the London Transport Museum. I'd like to bring to the panel's attention a couple of errors on the slide. The 7th bullet point should refer to the Hidden London exhibit being successful in receiving that award rather than a virtual tours component. And lastly, the final bullet point on that page should refer to the 5th of November as being the date that the Transport Museum closed to visitors. But it is worthwhile noting that the shop, the website and the virtual Hidden London tours remain accessible for people to get access to. Also, some very good news for the museum. It was awarded £1.75 million in funding from the Arts Council of England. There are only 10 recipients of that award in London, so very good news for the Transport Museum. And then finally, just covering off what has been the impact of all of this and our other efforts on our key customer metrics over this period. We continue to see sort of quite strong performance over the period in question. Worthwhile, though, updating you with our most recent results through for period 7. I guess what I'd just like to point out there is that during period 7, there was quite extensive coverage of transport for London's financial circumstances. There was also, I guess, a lot of conjecture about a potential move to a national lockdown. There was also cities in the north going into sort of I guess, a heightened sense of lockdown as well. So not unsurprisingly, we have seen a decline in some of the metrics. Care has dropped 3 points to 54%. London Underground's care score just declined slightly as well to 51, and the bus score down to 49%. It was pretty uniform across the board, and that's, I guess, typical of what we have seen historically when Transport for London has been in the news for other reasons as well. Obviously very interested to see how that bounces back over the next couple of periods. That was all I wanted to cover off. Hopefully that was a good summary for you, and I'm very happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mark. Open to questions and comments. I've got Lynn. Go ahead, Lynn.
Thank you, Mei-Ling. The first thing I wanted to say was, notwithstanding what you've just said, Mark, about the reputational score dropping slightly in the most recent period, I do think that what the reputational scores on TfL's care for its customer and providing a safe service for customer and so on, what those demonstrate is what an absolutely superb job has been done over this whole last period. And I think it is, it really made me feel very proud of TfL, actually, to just look at those scores and to see that, you know, that despite everything, over this last period of 9 months or so, they've, if anything, been going up. I don't think it's at all surprising, given some of the hostile media coverage there was in the period of period 7, that some people may have had a less positive view of TfL, as you just described. But I think all the evidence from the data over this long period is absolutely of what a fine job TfL has been doing in care, both in caring for its customers and in making sure that people know about what we're doing and why we're doing it, and our kind of commitment to make the network safe. So I think I'd really like it actually if it could be fed back in some way to staff, just how impressive that those results are. And the question I had was, you said quite early when you started speaking, Mark, what the level of usage was on the tube and on buses. And I think you said tube is at about 29% and buses at about 46%. But I might have slightly misremembered those numbers. But anyway, that the usage of buses is down rather less than usage of tubes. And I can see that if we have about half of current levels of bus use, it is possible that means that in the peak hour, actually we might be having still some quite crowded buses. And I wondered about whether it might be possible for us to have some sort of note back from officers about whether the load factors during the rush hour on buses are being kept to acceptable levels, because one can see that it might be very difficult to manage social distancing on buses if they're half full, when being full is pretty chock-a-block. So what are we doing to try to make sure that buses remain safe for people, and if necessary, putting on extra buses on certain routes? And I also think it's interesting that buses are down less, and presumably that's because buses are more used by people who are on lower incomes and who are in the sort of the jobs that you can't do from home, who have to get to the supermarket or to, whatever it is that to sort of physically be there. And so I just think it's really important that we make sure that we're providing good care for those people who may very much be essential key workers. So maybe a sort of report back at some point about how we're making sure that we're providing enough bus space to get those essential workers to work in a safe way. I'd very much appreciate. Thanks.
Yes, of course. Just to remind you of those numbers, so it was 24% of normal demand on the tube and 49% of bus journeys. So they're very happy to come back with a note around specifically how we're managing sort of social distancing and demand on the bus network. And I think you've rightly raised our own hypothesis is that I guess there is less opportunity for some bus users to work from home, as you've described, but also, those other essential journeys that people take within their local communities are often served greater by buses than by tube. So that's our hypothesis for why there's a lesser reduction on the bus network as opposed to the tube.
Thank you, Lynn. Important issues. I've got Anne and then Bronwyn. Anne?
Thanks. And I'd like to echo the comments made by Lynn in terms of what TfL has been doing over this period. So I think it is a credit to the organisation that you're keeping these scores where they are, and indeed what is being done to ensure that the system is safe. A couple of questions, Mark. First of all, you mentioned, I think it was on page 24, that 110 escalators have now had this new cleaning regime. To give me a sense of the scale of it, what proportion of the total network of escalators is that? I suppose I ought to know, but that doesn't sound that many against the total system. And I was just wondering what the scale of the task is, and indeed where you've concentrated these first ones, where the priority is. And my second question was over face mask compliance. I don't think it was in the slides, but I think I heard you say that compliance was at 90+%. And I was just wondering how you measure that, because there's always the problem, isn't there? And I have seen compliance officers and police officers at the bottom and top of escalators and places like that. But what some people do is they wear the mask past the compliance officer, and the minute they're past, they sit down in the train and pull it under their chin. and I just wonder how. There's not much you can do about it, but I'd just like to understand how you are measuring that, because I'm not sure if it's not a bit of a false statistic. Thanks.
So with respect to escalators, I should know how many escalators there are on the network. I'm sorry, I don't. So if I can come back to you with the proportion, certainly there has been work done to understand sort of where we think these units will have the most impact. So that's been the prioritization, but I will come back to the panel with an answer for what the, here we go. Caroline has been good enough to jump in. There are approximately 500 escalators on the Tube network. Thank you very much, Caroline. So give you a sense of where we've gotten to.
Thank you very much. That's actually not as many as I would have thought, but it's good to know that you've got 100 out of 500 done. Yeah.
One.
The other sort of question, what we do is we, I guess, triangulate in on a number from observations of our staff and compliance officers, but we also, through our customer insight work, track self-reporting of the people wearing masks as well, and that sort of gives us a range. And I guess what we know again from observation on the network is that it isn't the same number across all of London all of the time. You can go on certain journeys and you will see practically everybody wearing them, and then you could go on another journey at a different time of day in a different location and see much lower numbers. So that's why, certainly in terms of both enforcement activity but also some of our marketing efforts, targeting it is quite important.
Okay, thanks for that. I do also think it's really important that you publicise the number of people that you're keeping off the system, or the number of fines that you're giving out to people, so that they know that there are people going around looking and checking. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. I've got Bronwyn now. I know Jonathan wants to come in as well. Bronwyn, your comments and questions.
Yes, I'd just like to echo Anne's and Lynn's congratulations around the way that these figures have held up during the pandemic, and especially, you know, the figure around customers feeling that it's safe to travel on the public transport network during the whole period of the pandemic, and that of course reflects hard work from all of our teams, really, throughout the whole of TfL to convey that, and plus our work that we do around PR and communications. So I'd really like to echo what Lynn said and say, can we convey that to the team? The one thing I wanted to ask about was around there's a public perception, I think, around people feeling that bus drivers should be enforcing capacity levels on the buses and enforcing the mask compliance. And I'm just wondering whether there is any way in our messaging and advertising and so forth that we can get the message across that it's not the bus drivers that are doing that, and then, you know, and that it's another specialised team that carries out that work. Because I mean, and it's mostly anecdotal, but also stuff I've read in the press as well, from people, getting angry and upset because the bus driver is not enforcing these regulations.
Okay, Mark, and maybe Jonathan will come in as well on that point.
Yeah, my point was on the
do you want to go first?
So, yeah, and just to come back on the compliance point, I think it's a fair point. And in your presentation, Mark, you identify, don't you, that face covering compliance is the top item from customer feedback. So we're certainly listening hard to that. I think just in terms of getting a sense of scale, during this period, these numbers may have been reported elsewhere, but just to reinforce them for you, our own TfL enforcement officers stopped 120,000 customers, if you've seen this stat. So, and we've issued 1,000 fixed penalty notices and so on, even though that's the last resort. So, and there's other elements of that enforcement as well. So we're very keen on doing that. And to Bronwyn's point about making sure that there's support from those officers to bus drivers, absolutely, that's the focus. And our deployment and tasking plans have been very much focused on those areas where compliance is less compliant than it should be. So some hotspots around the network, points often in East London, the Stratfords, the West Hams have been particular concerns for us. So that's very much what our strategy has been, is to target the places where we see less compliance in support of our frontline staff. That's what I wanted to add.
Right. Anything else from other members? No, I mean, I'd just like to raise two sort of strategic points, really. I think, again, a really massive thank you to the communications and engagement teams and the directorate as a whole for the good work, and heartening to know these metrics are standing up. But nevertheless, I think there's still the issue about being smarter at engagement and communication on some specific programs like the street space, because obviously there's been quite a level of negative, if you like, publicity about that, particularly like the low traffic neighborhood. I think, that there's still an issue to make sure that we are much more smarter and much more specific in how we communicate and engage and consult on that program. The other issue for me is about segmentation. Again, we think communication engagement comes out in different ways with some of the inner London communities and the outer London communities, because travel patterns and use of different modes are different. So I think maybe in future, I would like a bit of a drill down, to that level, to look at some of those differences and what we're doing in terms of, if you like, again, messaging better the inner and outer London boroughs, where Londoners tend to use different forms of travel modes. I think that would be useful for this panel to understand better. And I think the other issue for me is, even if these customer metrics generally are holding up or even slightly improving, I think there's still a high level of anxiety about the potential permanent loss of some of the concessionary fares. Obviously, negotiations are still ongoing about, future financial settlement for the organisation and what conditions are being imposed on a future financial settlement. My question is, how can we actually, in our messaging and reassurance, to a large extent, we can do to, if you like, alleviate that level of anxiety about the potential loss of some of the potential permanent loss of some of these concessionary fares. I don't know whether, Mark, you want to comment on that, but obviously, how long is a piece of string, in terms of the last issue?
Yes, I think we sort of recognise that anxiety and why sort of continued engagement with stakeholder groups to understand what those concerns are, so that we can factor those where we have the ability to into how we address some of the issues around fares in the future, so that we're cognizant of the decisions that we're taking. And then I think it's about clarity of communication once we know the situation that we're in. But I do take your point, and perhaps one for us all to go away and have a think about how we can address appropriately.
Mm-hmm. And to communicate that, look, where sometimes it's actually not in the gift of Transport for London. So so the public, the travelling public, actually knows where those conditions are coming from. I think that's also important as well, in terms of the way we communicate to our customers and potential customers. So thank you for that. So members are asked to note that report. And again, if you could pass back a big thank you to all staff, that would be very, very good. Thank you. Can I move on to the next item? I know it's Caroline Sheridan. Whether members have any pressing issues to raise in this part 1 of that report, or we could kick it to part 2. Caroline, do you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Sorry, just trying to get off mute. Yeah, thank you. So yes, this paper is going to be discussed in more detail in the private section, but if there are any questions at this stage, I'm happy to take them.
Okay, Lynn.
Thank you, Mei-Ling. I had a couple of questions which I think are probably appropriate for part 1, but please tell me if they're not. I just wondered if it's possible, Caroline, to give us some sort of sense of how we prioritise in maintaining asset condition between the tube and rail and the road network, because it seems to me it's quite a difficult thing to do. It's a sort of apples and pears, and I just wondered if you were able to give any sort of sense of the thought process that that you go through in thinking about how to weigh the relative importance of asset condition on different parts of the sort of network that we're responsible for. And the second question I had was about whether you were able to give us any sort of steer about where the biggest gap is between what we'd like to do in terms of maintaining our assets and what at the moment we're actually able to do. So in a way, what's the area that you think that we should be focusing on most and keeping sort of keeping our attention on most? Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. There's quite big questions, but perhaps if I just give a sort of broad overview of how we're approaching this. So firstly, this is a pan-TfL risk. So one of the key things is that we can organise and manage ourselves against this risk in a pan-TfL way, and that means that we are able to consider the different types of assets, and across TfL there is a multitude of different assets. And it's really important that we can undertake a sort of trade-off between the areas and the assets that we have. And we do this by understanding the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. So we have a set of outcomes that we need to meet across every asset, which is consistent. And then we appraise using inputs such as asset condition, levels of investment to date, investment projects are undertaken at the moment to prioritise then our spend on that. So it is a number of factors that go in, primarily asset condition, but it wouldn't necessarily mean that we would trade off between, say, track, which is absolutely key, fundamental asset within rail and London Underground, which doesn't fail safe, and we wouldn't necessarily be able to trade that off against our road network condition, which obviously is, from a safety perspective, has equal prevalence. So we prioritise around the level of investment that we've had to date, the asset condition, engineering experience from our professional heads and input into that, and ultimately how that would impact on the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. That is a broad brush approach that we take across our asset groups. To address the gap question, I suppose the question, if we were not in the sort of financial constrained environment that we find ourselves today, what would we do? So this is all about looking at optimizing the investment in our assets and getting the right balance between maintenance intervention, renewals, enhancements and bigger investment projects. And really from a renewal sense, where are we today to where we'd want to be? Over the last few years, the level of investment in our renewals has not been at the levels that we would wish them to be, and sort of accumulate a renewal debt. And where we were working towards prior to COVID is to establish what we'd call a steady state. So this is the optimum balance of investment between our renewals and our maintenance elements. So ultimately it varies between the quantity of assets and the type of assets, and obviously how they get operated. But the optimum is to obtain this steady state of investment, so that you're balancing the condition. You can measurably improve the condition and therefore reduce the amount of reactive maintenance that you might have to do. And then you start really working in an environment where you can optimize the investment and the whole life cost investment of that asset. So where we are today is below that steady state, which lends to the prevalence of this risk and the scrutiny of controls that we need to put underneath it, such that we can work towards a steady state. If that answers your question generally.
Yeah, it does, Caroline. I think that's very helpful. And just to sort of understand a little bit more about how we approach this is good. I mean, maybe we'll get into more detail in part 2, but that is helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn and Caroline. I just want to make 2 general points in part 1. I mean, don't see this as a pushback from me or certainly from the panel, because obviously, like you say, this enterprise risk is a TfL one, and it could easily sit with PIC or the safety panel. And obviously, I understand that any failure in terms of any asset would result in terms of, from this panel's lens, if you like, is about jeopardizing a good public transport experience. But I think my just word of caution that I think this risk is so important, because it is a cross-cutting risk, that also I think, while we look at it through this panel, through the customer's eyes, if you like, it is very much still an issue and a risk for, PIC and the safety panel to be aware of. And obviously, I say this is a new enterprise risk that's actually allocated to this panel. It's got to sit with one of the panels, obviously, or a committee. But my point is such a cross-cutting risk that it's really important that it doesn't just rest solely with this panel. My other comment and observation is about bridges. Obviously, it's part of asset. Now, there's a lot of complexity about who owns London bridges. A bridge is really a road over some water, isn't it? And so I think maybe in future, not through the enterprise risk report, but somehow a better understanding by members of this panel, who owns the bridge, who's responsible for its investment and repair, would be actually quite useful. I don't know how other members of the panel feel about this, but I really do not have a clear picture of the dozens of London bridges and who's responsible for what. Would members find that helpful? I mean, obviously things like that will go to PIC anyway, but again, from a customer's point of view, certainly the current problems with Hammersmith Bridge, where we're also looking at the customer's point of view about finding alternative modes of transport to take people across the river is very important.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful, Lynn.
Right, okay.
Right.
If the Secretariat could put that on in the forward plan, that would be helpful. Okay, thank you. So let's move on to the next.
Sorry, Lynn, Alice wants to talk.
All right, okay, sorry. I'm sure trying to
thank you. It's
look
just
at all the functionalities.
It's on the risk issue, on the who owns this risk or who oversees this risk. At one point, and forgive me that I haven't got a photographic memory, so I can't remember it, there was a very useful diagram of all the various enterprise risks and how they related to one another, and which committee was dealing with which one. And I think it would be useful if board members in general could have a kind of reiteration of that, because I take Mei Ling's point, but But I think that there will be other risks that PIC and the safety guys are looking at that will cover the aspects of this, so that actually the lens that we're looking at it through becomes the critical lens, because it's not covered anywhere else, if you see what I mean. So I think that would be kind of handy.
Yeah, feeling into Howard, if I may. Just to say, yeah, I mean, I'm afraid it's just inevitable that the nature of the risks means that they don't sit cleanly with each with a particular committee and panel. And so what we've always done is just to do our best to allocate them. And of course, it's not meant to be that the committee or panel owns the risk in that sense. It's management that are responsible for the risk. It's just to provide that extra level of assurance that the risks are being properly managed. The Audit and Assurance Committee does oversee the whole batch. In fact, we were just discussing internally, and I was going to discuss with Anne actually as the chair of the Audit and Assurance Committee, that probably we're overdue a report to the board on the enterprise risks that would give you the whole picture. And certainly immediately we can give you that list of the risks mapped to the committees and panels, because obviously we have that because that's how we've allocated them. So I'd be very happy to agree to let you have that list. And then perhaps I could take away with Anne just to discuss how best we can make sure that we're keeping the board up to date on the whole picture, because recognising, there's been a lot of discussion at committees and panels, but it's a little while since we've had a whole board discussion about strategic risk.
Thank you for that. So that's one action point to respond to Alice. And also, I mean, it's also helpful that both Lynn and myself sit on audit as well. So that's very useful. That there's this doubling up of membership for audit, and at the end we recognise audit, if you like, holds the ring for the entire list of risks, if you like. So thank you very much. Can I move on to the next item, item 7? I think it's Mark again. Customer insights from post-COVID recovery.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Just taking again report as read and just highlight key issues, please.
Yes, of course. So the main purpose of the presentation was to inform the panel of our most recent insights regarding customer expectations, both from people who are considering a return to the network, but also, I guess, initial thoughts of those customers who are back using the network. As you say, I won't go into much detail. It's just worthwhile saying that I guess we're seeking to use this to build upon the work that we are already doing within the customer program, which was designed predominantly to address inconsistencies in the performance of the network. I guess that's the key feedback that we've had from customers historically is that most of the time in most locations we provide a great service. However, if we could improve reliability, if we could increase consistency, and if we could support customers better when things go wrong on the network, then that would continue to improve that customer proposition. If probably worthwhile jumping to slide 4 or page 44 of the presentation then, which just makes the point that all of those existing pain points that we had identified, a lot of them are sort of being exacerbated by COVID-19. And so as we build our customer program going forward, we need to be mindful of that. And we need good quality customer insight to do it. So on slide 5 and 6, it sort of gets into the meat of what our customers are telling us. And I'm conscious that both of those slides perhaps need a little bit of explanation. So slide 5 sort of shows us what people who are not yet back on the network, but what would encourage them to come back onto the network. And I guess that the analytical approach that was used here is something, I guess, similar to perhaps what you've done personally in the past, where you've maybe done a personality test where you're, whether that's an insights profile or Myers-Briggs, where you're presented with like a question set and you're asked, of these 4 things, which is the thing that best describes you and which is the thing that least describes you. So we did a similar thing. We identified 25 different measures that customers, but also we thought would have an impact upon their sort of desire to come back and use public transport. And then we asked them to rank them, which were the most important, which were the least important. And so if all of those 25 measures were of exactly the same importance, you would expect the numbers being shown up here to be 4. So 4 times 25 equals 100%. So anything which is above 4 as a number is more important, and anything below 4 is relatively less important. And I guess what you can see here is that for people thinking about coming back to bus, tube and rail modes, face covering enforcement is the single biggest issue that would encourage people who are not travelling at the moment to get back onto public transport. The next most significant thing is efforts to clean the network and to ensure that people understand how the network is being cleaned. So you can see that that's sort of the blue sort of bars which are prevalent towards the top of all of those different areas. And then lastly, our customers want to be assured of the fact that we are managing the network in a way which ensures that they have a high likelihood of being able to maintain social distancing. So, I guess this reassuringly has backed up and has fed into the work that we've done around our messaging to customers, which is we are providing a safe, clean and orderly public transport network. And hopefully that is why we're seeing larger numbers of people returning to the network. Slide 6 shows sort of a slightly different view and uses a different analytical technique. So this slide looks at, for those people who are already back and using public transport, what are the things that we could do to encourage them to make more journeys on the transport network? So I guess this picks up on the point that if you look at sort of Oyster card usage across the network, actually a high number of people are back using public transport. They're just not making the same number of trips that they used to. And we need to be mindful that transport itself is a derived demand. You don't just travel, or most people don't just travel for the sake of it. But to the extent that we're able to encourage people back, what would have greatest impact? And so a slightly different technique used here. We asked people to identify those things which, if present, would have the biggest impact upon them wanting to undertake more journeys, but also which things, if they were absent, would be most likely to discourage them from coming back and taking additional trips on the public transport network. And what you see here is a slightly different view of things. Face covering enforcement remains really important, and that's why it is front and center of all of our customer communications. But what you see is that for people who are back using the network, I think they're much more confident, and they've seen the efforts that we've gone to provide a clean network. They have experienced the measures that we have put in place to help with social distancing. So what you see appearing here are the things which are, I guess, the traditional drivers of customer satisfaction. Are we providing good value for money? Are we providing a reliable service? And I guess what this helps us to do moving forward, and if you were to go on to sort of slide 7, is to update our pain point matrices to help us to focus in on tackling some very specific things associated with COVID-19, so face covering enforcement, but then actually sort of look at some of our pre-existing pain points through the lens of COVID, and just recognise that actually a lot of these pain points are just being exacerbated. So, support when things go wrong on the network. So historically, that's been an issue because if I was out travelling, I experienced disruption, I would be annoyed because I wouldn't know how long it was going to be before I got home, and I wouldn't necessarily have the information needed to replan my journey. All of that still exists in a COVID and post-COVID world, but actually right at the moment, I'm also concerned that that's going to place me in a crowded situation that might heighten my chances of becoming ill. So yeah, we've used this insight to update our pain point matrix, and then that has been used, and you can see in the framework on slide on the next slide, which is page 48 of the presentation, to sort of create a structured methodology for facilitating what was going to be a customer-led recovery. We need to win our customers back and ensure that we're doing everything that we can to restore confidence for people to travel. We need to make sure that where we've introduced changes to the network to mitigate the impacts of COVID, that they're not having a disproportionate impact upon any particular customer groups. And we need to very much get on with delivering a high-quality public transport service. We're in the process at the moment of revising our customer strategy and a longer-term customer program, and we will bring this back to the panel for your comment and input sort of in the next few months. So very happy to take any questions on the campaign. I won't go into the specific examples that were within the presentation, given that you've already seen much of that in the previous presentation.
Thank you, Mark. Any comments and questions from members? Who's that? Lynn.
Thank you, Mei-Ling. Really helpful presentation. Thank you very much, and really interesting to see the sort of difference between people who are not using the network at the moment and people who are using it. I found that really helpful. This isn't really a question, it's more of a comment, that when one looks at the people who are using public transport at the moment, it's just interesting that for Tube, the top measure to drive satisfaction is value for money. And of course, that is going to become a more kind of, that's something that, A, it's not necessarily entirely within our gift anyway, in that it's the Mayor that sets fares policy, not Transport for London, but B, in the current relationship with government, of course, trying to continue to provide good value for money in terms of fares is going to become more difficult. And I just sort of wonder about whether over the medium term, we ought to be doing some thinking about whether there's anything creative that we could do at the point when coronavirus ceases to be such an issue and when we've all been vaccinated, to try to get people back to the network by saying, yeah, OK, fares have gone up. We didn't want that to happen, but it's happened. But for a period of time, we're going to reduce fares to try to get people to come back to the network. And at one level, of course, that's, that doesn't solve the long-term problem of our fares becoming more expensive. But I just sort of, it seems to me that some thinking about how we can somewhat ameliorate what is going to be the negative impacts of fares going up might be worthwhile at this stage. And I don't really feel like I know what the answer is, but it is something that is going to require our attention. Not really something for kind of immediate reaction or response necessarily, but just maybe something to sort of lodge in our minds collectively. Thanks.
That's a good point, Lynn. I mean, obviously, I think it's important we come up with some of these new ideas on how to, if you like, drive up ridership again, particularly obviously on the underground as well. And obviously working patterns will change with people probably permanently working more at home now, either full-time or partially. So we need some new ideas. And I was thinking, for example, just top of my head, like a family Oyster card, which could be cheaper. Like very often you do get membership of whether it's art galleries or the National Trust, where you actually have a family membership, where it's actually cheaper than individual ones. And just things like that, I think we need to do some innovative thinking on how to market ourselves and drive up ridership, particularly when we are all safely vaccinated. So I don't expect you to come back on that, Mark, but I don't know whether you've got some just initial thoughts.
A couple. So obviously on the point around value for money, there is restrictions on sort of our level of control around some of that, but that is a two-sided story as well. It's not just about the cost, it's about the service that you're providing. So we can stay very focused on making sure that we provide the best quality service that we can for the needs of Londoners in the future. And I guess that sort of leads on to the second point around a really crystal clear understanding of what our customers want from us, and perhaps more so than ever before, a recognition that there'll be a group of commuters who will be travelling in different ways and potentially at different times to what they have done historically. But also, we need to work with the retail, leisure, hospitality sectors in order to encourage other Londoners, but also visitors back to the city as well, and understanding what they need from the transport network, but also, I guess, a recognition that people travel for a purpose. And so, and I know that you're about to sort of hear from Julie Dixon and Julie's team, and others within TfL are working very closely with people within the hospitality, leisure, retail sectors to sort of understand how can we work together to think about getting people out and travelling again in London, because we're only a part of that picture. We can sort of remove some of the barriers. We can be mindful of some of the things which we can do to encourage people back, but we need the help of others as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. So members are asked to just note that report, and thank you for all your contributions. I'd like to move on to item 8, assessing the effectiveness of social media, with Julie Dixon.
Sorry, Mei Ling, I just had one brief comment.
Right, okay.
Okay.
I didn't see your raised hand.
I think
That's
did
fine.
put it up? Oh no, I didn't put it up. That's why you didn't see it. Sorry, apologies.
Fine.
It's just to say that it's absolutely. I found it absolutely fascinating, the difference between those two surveys of what would make you get back on the network, and then the other one, which is what would further drive your satisfaction, what would make you travel more on the network. And one of the things I found really interesting was on the buses, that the capacity wasn't in the top ones. There wasn't, that wasn't a concern for people who were thinking about whether they would travel more on the bus. I thought that was really interesting. I don't know what to make of it, but there it is. And also the fact that value for money also turned up in the buses as well as on the tubes, amongst the people who were thinking about, when or where they would travel, use the transport network more. So I think that reinforces Lynn's point and your point earlier on, Chair, about the fares and so on, concessionary fares.
Thank you for that contribution, Bronwyn. So let's move on to item 8. Julie Dixon.
Hi, good morning everyone. Thanks for inviting me along today. Just before I start, I'll just sort of build on the point that Mark was making then, and the question you had about encouraging people back onto the network. So we are actively looking at what we might do next year. There's a number of different ways you could approach it. Do you reward people almost like sort of a loyalty sort of scheme where points get discounts on either hospitality or leisure in London or retail, or to get discounts on their travel options? And there's about 8 or 9 different models that we're currently looking at the moment. So we're going through the stages to see actually which ones would bring the biggest business benefits to us in terms of encouraging people back to public transport. And as Mark said, a lot of work with people like London and Partners. There's the new group that started up called the SOS Group, which is made up of retailers and leisure and hospitality in London. looking at what we could do to promote and work with them, encouraging people back. So I think the key market for us will be people making those leisure journeys. The commuters will tend to come back because there's a necessity for them to come back, even if they're working in a slightly different way in terms of work patterns. But it's getting people to make those additional journeys on public transport that we're really focusing on at the moment. So I'm sure we'll be able to come back to you probably in the new year with our thoughts on which direction we might take on that. Okay, so just then going on to the presentation that I've been asked to give today, which is about assessing the effectiveness of our social media. I think that the question as well that came from the group was in particular around the impact of social media on behaviour change. So I'm just going to sort of pull out some key points from the presentation that I've put together. So I'm just on page 60 now. So I'm just going to cover off, the sorts of things that we think about when we're deciding how best to use social media, what different social media channels can do for us, talking a bit about the sort of the steps that we know people go through when they're considering behaviour change, how you can measure social media because it is different across all different channels. And then I've included a few case studies, one around active travel in particular, because that is a behaviour change campaign that we're running, but also just to give you a flavour of some of the things that we did in the first couple of months in response to the pandemic. So then just moving on to page 61. As I said, it's impossible to make a direct link between somebody seeing a social media message and then going on to actually do an action or change the behaviour. So what instead we think about is what's the best channel to reach the audience that we want to try and influence. And then we think about, well, what would good look like so that we can review our performance. So, for example, we might expect to see the number of people that have seen a message and then clicked through onto the web page for more information. And we'll set ourselves benchmarks based on our own previous performance, really, to see, well, did that content work? Did the channel work for us in the way we was expecting it to? And then adjusting the use of those different social media channels depending on the outcomes that we saw. So we've got our own social media channels referred to generically sort of in the industry as organic channels, and then you have paid for channels. So that's where we might pay for a display ad on somebody else's channel. And we're fortunate, we've got a high number of followers on our own channels, but what we'll normally do is we'll use a mix of our own channels and a mix of paid for, and then trying to also keep up with new and emerging channels as they come on stream and people start to adopt those. So just going on to page 62, which just explains a little bit more about the difference between our channels, so things like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, where we manage the content, versus really effectively sort of paying for a display ad in the same way you would do in a newspaper, magazine, TV or radio. And as I say, generally with the paid for, that's when we might go into new and emerging channels rather than fully adopting them as our own channels in the first instance. And there's an example of that later on in the presentation. But the main difference with our own channels is that we manage the content and we can actively engage with customers through our own channels, which you can't do necessarily through a paid for channel. But the paid for channel does give you reach and scale. So just going on, I'll just go on to page 64, which just talks a bit about where we are now and where we're moving to. So it's being selective about the channels that you use, because if you jump into using a new channel, you're always going to find that obviously there are customers that are going to adopt it, and then if that channel isn't working for you in the way that you want it to, it's quite difficult to pull out of a channel. So often people will say to us, why aren't you using Snapchat or TikTok? But once you're in there, it's very hard to pull back out of them. So we need to be quite selective about the channels that we use. And also making sure that rather than taking a one-size-fits-all across all of the different social media channels, that you're really developing the bespoke and right content for the what works on the different characteristics of the different social media channels. So, for example, format. Video format might work well on one type of channel, whereas text works well on another type of channel, or with GIF or something. So just going on to slide 65 or page 65. So I mentioned about the behaviour change, and what we do is we look at, it's almost a bit like the traditional change curve that people go through. We think about the number of different stages that a customer or user might go through when we're thinking about influencing their behaviour. So the first thing we want to do is we want to inform customers and raise awareness of something. This is kind of the what. Then we want to move them through into inspiring them to actually make the change, and that's often about setting out the benefits of a behaviour change. So that's kind of the why should you make that change in your life. And then we want to actually move them through to enabling and helping them to make that change. So that's giving people the tools and the information that they need to make that change. That's, okay, you know about it, you've been inspired, you understand the benefits, and this is now how you can go on and actually make that change. And I mentioned behaviour change, but as Mark has described, some of these things are around wanting people to wear a face mask, wanting people to wear to travel at quiet times. So it's taking people through these different stages of that journey to the point where they are actually doing what we hope that that we want them to do. So just going to go on to slide or page 66. So measuring performance. Each social media channel, whether that's Twitter or Facebook, has its own unique ways of measuring engagement. So they're all slightly different, but in essence, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get people to engage with that social media message. And that's either making sure that our message is displayed as many times as it possibly can be, and that people then actually do something when they see that message. They click the like button, they comment on it, they maybe share it with their friends as well. Then we're measuring reach and frequency. So that's a bit like traditional media, where you might buy advertising space on radio, and it's traditionally used to be, or is measured as OTH, opportunities to hear. So you're looking at how many people would normally listen to that radio program, and then you're estimating how many people would have heard it. It's exactly the same on social media. You're looking at what the estimated number of people are that will have seen that message, because not all of your messages are displayed. And then we're looking at the call to action. So what did people actually do when they saw that message? So did they click through to see more information, for example, on the website? So for each of these different performance measures, for each of the different campaigns, we're setting ourselves targets against these three areas, and then we're seeing how well we perform. Each of the campaigns performs against those.
Okay.
So then I just thought it was useful just to, I'm not going to go through this slide, 67 just shows the sort of the breakdown and the demographics of the most popular types of social media channels.
Team members might want to come in later. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So then I've just given a breakdown of our different owned channels. So this is just to show the scale. So on Twitter, we've got 2.4 million followers. So it's a large audience. As I said, just because we post a message on Twitter doesn't mean to say that 2.4 million people see that Twitter message. It can be quite a small number that will actually see it. It's a bit like when you buy an advert on a TV channel, the TV broadcasters will tell you how many millions of people have been watching that program. But of course, we know when it comes to the adverts, people might have gone off and made a cup of tea, or they might have skipped through the adverts because they've pre-recorded it. So that's no guarantee that just because you've got those number of people following or watching that TV program, that number of people have seen it. Where Twitter has changed over the last couple of years is around customer service. So we do a lot of activity around customer service through the contact center on Twitter, and people's expectations around customer service on Twitter are really increasing, so that people expect an answer within half an hour of posting something on our social media, on our Twitter feed. They expect that really quick answer and us to be responsive. And what we'll also do is we'll scan what's happening on our Twitter feeds, just to maybe measure sentiment, what people are saying about us. If we put out a campaign, we might want to see how people are reacting to that. And as we know, people can be very vocal on Twitter. So go on, I thought he was going to say something then.
No, I was just wanting to, obviously conscious of the time and wanting to let members come in.
Oh, okay. I'm sure I'll take questions at the end.
Anything else you want to highlight briefly, Julie?
So, well, I'll just skip through the examples of the of Facebook and Instagram there. So just on page 74, this is just an example of us using something different. This was using Snapchat when we needed to make school children aware of the changes to the buses or the bus operations when they were going back to school. And difficult audience for us to reach. They're not traditionally going to be using our social media channels. They want something that they've got short attention span, and you can see there we put on 3 different videos, and the 2-second video performed so much better than the 10-second video. So this is just an example of how we consider the audience and the different types of channels, making sure that you get the content right. And then on active travel, a lot of work has been happening on there, using all different channels, and there's a few on there that you wouldn't necessarily think of. So we've got a blog which gets about 20,000 visits a month, where we're talking about cycling and walking and car free day. We use social media. Mark mentioned car free day earlier. We put videos up there where we saw about 350,000 people viewing videos about car free day. We ran competitions as well. And I'll just skip on. I just did a very quick summary of some of the things that we did through March, April and May around coronavirus. And again, things like the video that we did featuring staff talking about the services for critical workers, that performed exceptionally well and was looked at 270,000 times. And using, as you can see on the number 77, page 77, using NHS staff to get our message across. So it's I suppose what I'm saying is a constant iteration of different types of messages, different formats, being creative and coming up with new content that customers are going to find useful, really.
Thank you. Okay. There's quite a lot there.
There is a lot there. It's a big subject.
Comments? I mean, I do use social media, but not that much. Thank goodness. Any observations and comments? Alice, Bronwyn. Alice first.
Thank you, Meiling. Can you tell us a bit more about because you said that it's quite difficult, and the slide set said that it's quite difficult to get out of a particular channel. Can you tell us a bit more about the decision-making process around going into and getting out of a channel, and why it's, I can guess why it's difficult to get out, but I'd like a bit more info.
Okay, so I think when we're thinking about entering a channel, we want to be on a reputable channel. So a lot of social media channels might get quite a lot of bad media, or they're not particularly good at controlling the types of content that they had. So, TikTok has been in the news a lot lately, and we wouldn't necessarily want to be associated with a channel that's not managing its content very well, whereas Facebook has quite strict controls about the type of content that they'd have in there. people might argue against that, but they probably do a little bit more than somebody like TikTok would do. So that's one consideration. And then thinking about how much is it being adopted by people and the demographics of the people that are using those channels, and are they actually an audience that we want to reach? So that's some of the considerations about going in there. When it comes to coming out of the channel, and some of you will be familiar with that we closed down some of the Twitter channels, we're looking really at, are people actually still using those channels and engaging with them? So if we think back many years ago, we used to send SMS messages to people about service information. And we just started to see the numbers just declining at such a rapid rate that we got down to just a couple of thousand people that were actively using that. And so not only are we looking at, are people still actively using it, but actually are there new and emerging channels, digital channels that we've brought in that actually offer a better service now? So SMS is a great example, where the text message was only short, only gave people limited information, but actually we've got things like all of the third-party apps now, better website. So there was channels that were performing and could offer far better service. So we came out of providing SMS messages.
Right, I'm going to take Bronwyn and Lynn first together, and then before Julie come in. Bronwyn.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I thought this was a really good piece of thoughtful, painstaking work on the social media. A really good use of the different channels, I think, and really interesting the use of the Snapchat for the school children. I thought really innovative and creative to use that channel. And I take on board what is said about the fact that we can't track from the sending out of the social media to a change in behaviour. But I'm just wondering whether there is any kind of survey that we could do that could track back from people who've changed their behaviour to messages coming out from TfL, or whether that'd be too complicated and too expensive to do that.
Lynn, do you want to come in? I know you've
no, I'll pass me, Ling, in the interest of time.
Okay. Yeah. Just a quick response to Bronwyn.
Yeah, I just got to pick up on that last point about the survey. So generally messages will be part of a multi-channel campaign. So there could be posters, radio, social media, a whole host of different messages that are going out along different channels. And what we do is we do survey customers and ask them, did you see a campaign? How did it make you feel? And did you change your behavior? What did you do differently as a result of doing that? So we do it on a campaign-wide level, but we wouldn't then say, did you see that as a poster? Did you see the social media post? Because often people will have seen multiple channels and they won't necessarily remember where they saw that or which channel they saw it on, but they would remember the overall message that might be talking about walk more, cycle more, etc. So we will ask them at sort of a broad level, did you see that campaign? How did it make you feel? And did you do anything differently as a result of seeing that?
Right, thank you. That's interesting report. So without any other comments from members, we'll ask to note that report. Thank you, Julie, for that work, and keep it up. Thank you. Right. Next item is member suggestions for future items. I don't see anything. Obviously, we've highlighted a couple in this meeting, so that will be put on to the forward plan. So any other business? No, thank you. Date of next meeting is the 24th of February next year. And hopefully, who knows, we might be able to meet face to face, provided we've had our vaccines. Thank you. And now I think I can actually declare this part of the meeting formally closed, and officers can stop the recording before